In the humid dawn of March 3, 1943, Japanese destroyer Captain Commander Hideo Kuboki stands on the bridge of his ship, the Arashio, scanning the horizon through the morning mist of the Bismarck Sea. Below him, exhausted sailors work frantically to pull oil-soaked survivors from the water. Men from the transport ship Kyokus Maru that had been sunk the day before, the convoy of Operation 81, carrying desperately needed reinforcements to Lae, New Guinea. Hasselreddy lost one ship to American B-7. But Kuboki and his fellow captains believe the worst is behind them. They're only hours from their destination, and their fighter cover from Lae should protect them through these final miles. Then at approximately 10 a.m., a lookout's voice cuts through the morning air, with a single word that would seal the fate of thousands. Aircraft. What Kuboki sees approaching from the southwest is unlike any attack he has witnessed in his years of naval warfare, not the high-altitude B-7s they had faced yesterday, dropping their bombs from 5,000 FT, where anti-aircraft guns could at least attempt to reach them. These aircraft are different. B-25 Mitchell bombers and Australian bow fighters coming in so low their propellers are practically churning the sea spray. And they are coming fast, directly at water level in a coordinated assault that would revolutionize naval warfare in the Pacific. In mere seconds, the time it takes for a skip bomb with its 5-second delay fuse to bounce across the water, Captain Kuboki's world will explode into chaos. His ship will be crippled, his steering destroyed, sending the Arashio careening into the transport ship Nojima Maru in an uncontrolled collision. Within 15 minutes, the entire convoy will be decimated. 7 transport ships carrying 6,900 desperately needed troops will be burning or sinking. 4 of 8 destroyer escorts will be destroyed or fatally damaged. This is not just another convoy attack. This is the moment when skip bombing, a revolutionary tactic developed in secret by American innovators, would prove that surface ships could no longer operate safely within range of land-based aircraft. From the perspective of the Japanese captains who faced this onslaught, this is the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. It is January 1943, 2 months before the devastating attack that would shock the Imperial Japanese Navy. In the headquarters of the 8th Area Army at Rabaul, New Britain, Lieutenant General Hitoshi Imamura faces an increasingly desperate situation. The Allied forces have just captured Buna on the New Guinea coast after months of brutal fighting, and now they threaten the vital Japanese bases at Lee and Salamaua. These bases are not just military installations. They are the cornerstone of Japan's entire defensive strategy in the Southwest Pacific, protecting the approaches to Rabaul, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, where nearly 100,000 Japanese troops are stationed. Without Lae, the Allies would have a clear path to advance up the New Guinea coast, eventually threatening the Philippines and even the home islands themselves. The mathematics of war in this theater are brutal and unforgiving. Every soldier, every bullet, every grain of rice must travel by ship from Rabaul across the treacherous waters of the Solomon and Bismarck Seas. The distance is only 500 miles, but it might as well be 5,000 given the growing strength of Allied air power operating from bases in Port Moresby and Milan Bay. Already, previous convoy attempts have met with mixed success. On January 7th, a convoy carrying the 102nd Infantry Regiment under Major General Toru Okabe had managed to reach Lae, but not without casualties. The transport Nichiru Marua sunk by an Australian Catalina flying boat, taking with it all of Okabe's medical supplies and 361 soldiers. Another transport, Myoko Maru, was so badly damaged it had to be beached. The cost of reinforcing New Guinea was becoming prohibitive. General Imamura knows he must act decisively. Intelligence reports indicate the Allies are preparing for a major offensive. He needs to reinforce Lae with at least a full division if he hopes to hold the position. After heated discussions with his staff and naval commanders, a plan emerges. Operation 81, a major convoy operation that would deliver 6,900 fresh troops of the 51st Division directly to Lae in one massive effort. The risks are acknowledged. Admiral Ishiroku Yamamoto himself, architect of Pearl Harbor, warns that losses could exceed 50%. But the alternative, attempting to land the troops farther up the coast and marching them through hostile jungle terrain, would likely result in even greater casualties from disease, starvation, and Allied air attacks. The decision is made, the convoy will sail. The man chosen to lead this critical operation is Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, commanding the 3rd Destroyer Squadron. At 54 years old, Kimura is one of the Imperial Navy's most experienced destroyer commanders, a veteran of countless night battles in the Solomons where Japanese destroyers had proven their superiority time and again. His force for Operation 81 is impressive. 8 of the Imperial Navy's finest destroyers, all battle-hardened veterans of Guadalcanal. The Shirayuki, wearing Kimura's flag, would lead the formation. With him are the Asashio, Arashio, Tokitsukas, Yukikaz, Shikinami, Uranami, and Asagumo, names that strike fear into Allied sailors who face them in night combat. But this operation would be different from the lightning-fast destroyer runs Kimura has perfected in the Solomons, what the Americans call the Tokyo Express. This time his sleek destroyers must shepherd 8 slow, vulnerable transport ships loaded with soldiers and supplies. The convoy's maximum speed would be just 7 knots, barely faster than a man can jog. For Kimura, accustomed to slashing through enemy waters at 30 knots, this snail's pace must feel like sailing with an anchor deployed. Every hour at sea increases the chance of detection. Every mile traveled in daylight invites air attack. Meanwhile, 500 nm away in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, a very different kind of military mind is at work. Lieutenant General George Churchill Kenny, commander of the 5th Air Force, has been wrestling with a problem that has plagued his forces since he arrived in theater 6 months ago: how to sink ships from the air. Traditional Heil bombing has proven almost useless against moving vessels. In the January convoy battle, his bombers flew 416 sorties and managed to sink just 2 ships. A miserable return on investment that would be unacceptable in any business, let alone war. Kenny knows that if he cannot stop Japanese convoys from reinforcing their positions, MacArthur's planned offensive up the New Guinea coast will bog down into a bloody stalemate. But Kenny is not a traditional military thinker. Before the war, he had been something of a maverick, constantly in trouble for proposing radical ideas that challenged orthodox doctrine. In 1928, while teaching at the Air or Tactical School, he had theorized about a technique he called skip bombing, dropping bombs from very low altitude so they would skip across the water like stones and explode against a ship's hull. The idea had been dismissed as too dangerous, too impractical. But now, with American forces desperate to interdict Japanese shipping, Kenny decides it is time to turn theory into reality. The development of skip bombing is not just a technical challenge. It is a revolution in aerial warfare that requires rethinking everything about how bombers attack ships. Major William Benn, commanding the 63rd Bombardment Squadron, becomes Kenny's primary test pilot for the technique. Through trial and error, they discover that the ideal approach is to come in at just 200 to 250 ft altitude. Flying at 200 to 250 mph, the bomb must be released 300 to 600 wider from the target with a 4 to 5 second delay fuse. Too high and the bomb won't skip properly. Too low and the aircraft risks being destroyed by its own bomb blast or flying debris from the target. The margin for error is essentially 0. But Kenny realizes that skip bombing alone won't be enough. The bombers need to suppress the intense anti-aircraft fire they will face during their low-level approaches. This is where another military innovator enters the story. Major Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn, a 43-year-old former Navy pilot who has become Kenny's secret weapon for unconventional solutions. Gunn is already something of a legend in the Southwest Pacific. When the war started, he was a civilian airline pilot in the Philippines. His family was captured by the Japanese and interned at Stotomas prison camp in Manila, a personal tragedy that has given him a burning desire for revenge against the Japanese military. Gunn's mechanical genius becomes the key to making skip bombing survivable. Taking a standard B-25 Mitchell bomber, he strips out the bombardier's compartment in the nose and replaces it with 4 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns. But he doesn't stop there. He adds 2 more guns, one each side of the fuselage and another 4 underneath, creating a flying gunship with devastating forward firepower. When Kenny first sees Gunn's modified B-25, nicknamed Pappy's Folly, he immediately recognizes its potential. Pull everything out of the nose and fill it full of 50 caliber guns, he tells Gunn. I want you to strap more on the sides. Give me all the forward firepower possible. I want a skip bomber that can overwhelm the deck defenses of a Japanese destroyer. Through February 1943, the modified bombers practiced relentlessly against the wreck of the SS Pruth, a passenger ship that had run aground off Port Moresby in 1923. Day after day, the B-25s roar in at mast height, their guns blazing, bombs skipping across the water to slam into the rusted hulk. The accuracy is remarkable. far better than anything achieved by hilo bombing. But practicing against a stationary wreck is one thing. Attacking a convoy of warships with trained anti-aircraft crews and fighter cover is something entirely different. The Australian contribution to this revolutionary tactic cannot be overlooked. Number 30 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force Flying Bristol Beaufighters has been developing its own low-level attack techniques. The Beaufighter, with its 420mm cannons and 6 machine guns, is perfectly suited for suppressing ship defenses. Group Captain Bill Garing, an RAF officer on Kenny's staff with extensive experience in anti-shipping operations from the European theater, proposes a coordinated attack plan. Both fighters will go in first at mast height, suppressing anti-aircraft positions with cannon and machine gun fire, followed immediately by the skip-bombing B-25s. Heil B-7s will attack simultaneously from above, dividing the enemy's defensive fire and creating maximum confusion. On February 14th, reconnaissance photos off Rabaul Harbor send a shock through Allied headquarters. The images show 79 vessels in port, including 45 merchant ships and 6 large transports. It is clear that a major convoy operation is imminent. 2 days later, Ultra Intelligence, the top secretariat ability to read Japanese coded messages, provides the crucial details. Naval code rears in Melbourne and Washington have decrypted Japanese messages revealing that a convoy will depart Rabaul on February 28th, destination Lae, carrying major reinforcements from the 51st Division. The messages even specify the convoy's planned route and estimated arrival date of March 5th. Kenny immediately recognizes this as the opportunity he's been waiting for, a chance to test his new tactics in a decisive battle. He summons his key commanders to Port Moresby for a final planning session. Brigadier General Ennis Whitehead, Kenny's deputy and commander of the advanced echelon in New Guinea, will coordinate the attack. The plan calls for maximum effort from every available aircraft: 90 heavy bombers B-17 and B-24s, 41 medium bombers B-25s, 34 light bombers A-20 Havocs, and 54 fighters P-38 Lightnings and P-40 Warhawks. In total, 219 aircraft will be thrown against the convoy, the largest coordinated airstrike yet attempted in the Southwest Pacific. The Allied pilots are both excited and apprehensive. Skip bombing is still experimental, and many have never attempted it in combat. Lieutenant Charles Howe of the 3rd Attack Group voices the concern many feel. We're going to be sitting ducks coming in that low. One lucky hit from our destroyer's guns and we're done. But Major Ed Lana, who will lead the skip bombing attack, exudes confidence. We've trained for this. Trust the plan. Go in fast, hit hard, and get out. The Beaufighters will clear the way for us. Back in Rabaul, the Japanese convoy prepares for departure with meticulous care. Each transport ship is combat-loaded, meaning equipment and supplies are packed in reverse order of need, allowing for the fastest possible unloading at Lae. The 954 soldiers of the 51st Division's 115th Regiment board their assigned transports: the Ayon Maru, Kembaru Nojima Maru, Oigawa Maru, Shini Maru, Tamaru, and Teio Maru. An 8th transport, the Natsushima, carries aviation fuel and supplies desperately needed by the Japanese air units at Lae. The destroyers themselves carry an additional 958 troops packed into every available space. The human cargo includes some of the Japanese Army's most important commanders in New Guinea. Lieutenant General Hatazo Adachi, commander of the entire 18th Army, boards the destroyer Tokitsuka's. Lieutenant General Hidemitsu Nakano, commander of the 51st Division, takes passage on the Yukazi along with his complete divisional staff. The concentration of senior leadership in a single convoy is unusual, and speaks to both Japanese confidence and desperation. Confidence that their destroyers can protect the convoy. Desperation to get these commanders to Lae where they are urgently needed to stabilize the deteriorating situation. Admiral Kimura's operational plan reflects hard-learned lessons from previous convoy operations. Instead of taking the direct route across the Solomon Sea, which would expose them to air attack for the maximum time, the convoy will take a longer northern route. They will sail north from Rabaul, then west along the north coast of New Britain, using the island's mountains to shield them from Allied radar and provide some protection from air attacks approaching from the south. The final leg will be the most dangerous, south through the restricted waters of the Vitez Strait, then a dash along the Huon Gulf coast to Leh. The strait, only 50 miles wide at its narrowest point, will funnel the convoy into a predictable path where they will be most vulnerable to air attack. To provide air cover, the Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces at Rabaul promise 100 fighters on rotating patrol over the convoy. This promise carries its own problems. The distance from Rabaul to the Vita Strait is at the extreme range for Japanese fighters. They can remain on station for only brief periods before having to return to refuel. Moreover, many of the Japanese pilots are exhausted from months of continuous combat, and their aircraft are increasingly worn out with spare parts in critically short supply. The reality is that the convoy will have effective air cover for only portions of its journey. On the evening of February 28, 1943, as tropical darkness falls over Simpson Harbor, the convoy begins its departure. One by one, the heavily laden transport seas away from the wharves, their decks crowded with soldiers taking what many must suspect will be their last look at rebel. The destroyers circle protectively, their crews at battle stations despite being in friendly waters. Submarine attacks even this close to base are not unknown. Rear Admiral Kimura, standing on Shirayuki's bridge, watches his charges form into two columns, the destroyers taking station on the flanks and ahead of the formation. At exactly midnight, he orders the convoy to proceed at 7 knots, course 350 degrees into the darkness of the Bismarck Sea. The first day passes without incident. The weather, often the sailors' enemy, becomes their ally as two tropical storms sweep through the Solomon and Bismarck Seas, bringing low clouds and rain squalls that hide the convoy from Allied reconnaissance aircraft. The Japanese sailors and soldiers, many already seasick from the slow rolling of the overloaded transports, nonetheless feel relief with each passing hour that brings them closer to their destination without detection. But Rear Admiral Kimura knows this cannot last. The storms are breaking up, and tomorrow will likely bring clear weather and with it American bombers. His concerns are well-founded. At 3:00 p.m. on March the 1st, as the convoy rounds Cape Gloucester at the western tip of New Britain and turns south toward the Vita Strait, the clouds part briefly. At that exact moment, a B-24 Liberator of the 91st Bombardment Group, piloted by Lieutenant Walter Higgins, is passing overhead on a routine reconnaissance flight. Higgins can hardly believe his luck as he counts the ships below. 8 transports, 8 destroyers, exactly where intelligence said they would be. He immediately radios the contact report that sets in motion one of the most decisive air-sea battles of the Pacific War. At 5th Air Force Headquarters in Port Moresby, the atmosphere becomes electric as Higgins' contact report arrives. General Kenny immediately orders the execution of the attack plan they have rehearsed so carefully. But there is a problem. The convoy has been spotted earlier than expected, still north of the Vita Strait, where Japanese fighters from New Britain can more easily provide cover. Whitehead makes a crucial decision. The first attack will be conventional high-level bombing by B-7s designed to damage and slow the convoy. The decisive skip bombing attack will wait until tomorrow, when the convoy will be in the more restricted waters of the strait with less room to maneuver. On the morning of March 2nd, as the convoy continues its journey through increasing clear weather, the first American attack develops. B-17 Flying Fortresses approach at 6,500 ft, their formations tight despite harassment from approximately 30 Japanese fighters that rise to meet them. The Japanese transport captains, mostly civilian mariners pressed into military service, watch in horrified fascination as the huge 4-engine bombers release their loads. Water spouts erupt around the convoy as most bombs miss. But the law of averages works in the Americans' favor. The transport Kyokumaru takes a direct hit, breaks in half, and sinks within minutes. Another transport is damaged and begins falling behind. Captain Sato Yasuo, commanding the destroyer Asashio and serving as commander of Destroyer Division 8, immediately moves to rescue survivors from the sinking Kyokus Maru. His crew pulls nearly 700 soldiers and sailors from the oil-slicked waters, cramming them into every available space on the destroyer. This humanitarian action, while admirable, has tactical consequences. Asio is now dangerously overloaded and less maneuverable, her fighting efficiency compromised by the mass of survivors on her decks. As night falls on March the 2nd, Rear Admiral Kimura faces a critical decision. The convoy is still 12 hours from Leh, but they have lost on transport and others are damaged. Should they continue at slow speed with the damaged ships, maintaining convoy integrity, but remaining vulnerable for longer, Or should the faster ships race ahead, splitting the convoy? But getting at least some troops to lay quickly, Kimura chooses to keep the convoy together, a decision that will prove fatal. He signals all ships maintain formation. We proceed to lay together. Unknown to Kimura, his decision has been intercepted and decoded by Allied intelligence. Kenny and Whitehead know exactly where the convoy will be at dawn, its speed, its formation. The stage is set for the revolutionary attack that will change naval warfare forever. That night, the Allied strike crews receive their final briefings. The tension is palpable as pilots and gunners check and recheck their aircraft. Many write letters home, understanding that tomorrow's low-level attack will put them within point-blank range of Japanese guns. Dawn on March 3, 1943, breaks clear and calm over the Bismarck Sea. Perfect flying weather. The Japanese convoy, now in the confined waters approaching the Huon Gulf, maintains its steady 7-knot advance toward Leh, now only hours away. The surviving transports have tightened their formation, the destroyers circling them protectively like sheepdogs around a flock. Rear Admiral Kimura has ordered all ships to maintain strict anti-aircraft discipline. No gun is to fire unless specifically ordered, conserving ammunition for the battle he knows is coming. At 10 a.m., the first wave of Allied aircraft appears on the horizon. But this is not the highly tacked the Japanese expect. Royal Australian Air Force bow fighters of No. 30 Squadron, led by squadron leader Claude Ridley, come in at wave-top height, so low that their propwash leaves wakes on the calm sea. Behind them, visible as dark specks against the morning sky, are the B-25s of the 3rd Attack Group. On the bridge of the destroyer Arashio, Commander Hideo Kuboki has mere seconds to process what he is seeing and react. His mind, trained through years of naval service, must calculate multiple variables simultaneously: the speed and angle of the approaching aircraft, the limitations of his anti-aircraft guns which cannot depress low enough to engage targets at sea level, the need to maneuver his ship while maintaining protection for the transports. But these precious seconds are not enough time. The bow fighters are already upon him, their 4 20mm cannons and 6 machine guns unleashing a storm of fire that sweeps across Arashio's decks. The bow fighter attack is devastating in its focused violence. Cannon shells explode among the anti-aircraft gun crews, killing or wounding most before they can bring their weapons to bear. Machine gun fire razz the bridge, shattering windows and cutting down officers and signalmen. In seconds, Arashio's ability to defend herself is critically degraded. But the bow fighters are just the opening act. Right behind them come the B-25s, each carrying 2 500 lb bombs with 5-second delay fuses, their nose-mounted guns already firing. Major Ed Lana leads the B-25 attack, his modified bomber Betty's Dream approaching the destroyer Shiryuki at 220 mm, altitude 50 ftadun through his gun sight. He can see Japanese sailors scrambling across the deck, some manning guns, others diving for cover. At 300 YD, Lana releases his bombs and pulls up sharply, clearing the destroyer's mast by mere feet. Behind him, his bombs skip across the water once, twice, then slam into Shiraki Shoal just below the waterline. The effect is catastrophic. The bombs penetrate the destroyer's relatively thin hull before exploding inside, their blast magnified by the confined spaces. Shiryuki's stern is virtually blown off, her rear magazine detonating in a massive explosion that sends debris and bodies flying hundreds of feet into the air. Within minutes, Rear Admiral Kimura's flagship is sinking, taking with her dozens of crew members. Kimura himself, wounded by shrapnel, is pulled from the water by the destroyer Shikinami. The attack develops with choreographed precision that would be beautiful if it weren't so deadly. As the bow fighters and B-25 sweep through the convoy at sea level, high above them, B-17s of the 43rd Bombardment Group release their loads from 7,000 lift. The convoy's anti-aircraft gunners, those still alive and functioning, face an impossible choice. Engage the low-level attackers who pose the most immediate threat, or try to disrupt the aim of the high-level bombers. Most choose the former, filling the air with tracers and shell bursts, but the B-25s are moving too fast and too low for effective engagement. Lieutenant Charles, how flying his B-25 Chatterbox selects the transport Teomaru as his target. The ship loaded with over 1,000 soldiers is attempting to turn away from the attack, her wake showing a desperate spiral as her captain tries to present a smaller target, but at skip bombing range and speed. Such evasive maneuvers are futile. Howe's bombs skip perfectly, one hitting amidships, the other near Thestern. Teomaru seems to lift from the water as the explosions tear through her hull, then settles rapidly, listing heavily to port. Within 5 minutes, she's capsized, trapping hundreds of soldiers below decks. The destroyer, Tokatsukaze, carrying Lieutenant General Adachi, becomes the target of 3 B-25s simultaneously. Her captain, Commander Masayoshi Motoaura, attempts to shield the nearby transports by placing his ship between them and the attackers. A brave but ultimately futile gesture. Multiple bomb hits leave Tokatsukaze dead in the water. Her engine rooms flooded, fires raging amidships. General Adachi, remarkably uninjured, is evacuated to the destroyer Yukazi. But 19 of Tokatsukaze's crew are not so fortunate, killed instantly by the bombs and strafing. Commander Kuboki's Arashio, already damaged by the bow fighter attack, now faces the B-25s. One bomb destroys her steering gear, sending the destroyer into an uncontrolled turn that results in a collision with the transport Noimamaru. The two ships, locked together by the twisted metal of the impact, become sitting ducks for the next wave of attackers. Both vessels are abandoned, their crews taking to the water as fires consume them. In the midst of this carnage, individual acts of heroism and horror play out. On the transport Kembaru, soldiers of the 51st Division, many of whom have never seen combat, struggle to launch life rafts as the ship lists increasingly to starboard. Their officers, swords drawn, try to maintain order, but panic is spreading as the reality of their situation becomes clear. They are hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly shore in shark-infested waters with American aircraft, methodically destroying any vessel that might rescue them. The destroyer Asashio, still crowded with survivors from yesterday's sinking, attempts to fight back. Her captain, Captain Sato Yasuo, commander of Destroyer Division 8, orders every available weapon to fire at the attacking aircraft, creating a curtain of steel that momentarily causes some B-25s to alter course. But weight of numbers tells a B-17 high above, almost forgotten in the chaos of the low-level attack, places a 500 lb bomb directly on Ashio's forward deck. The explosion, combined with the hundreds of extra personnel aboard, causes rapid flooding. Captain Sarto, true to the code of the samurai, chooses to go down with his ship. According to survivors, his last words were, "I'm tired, just let me rest peacefully here." Asio sinks with enormous loss of life, not just her crew, but many of the soldiers she had rescued the day before. Captain Sarto would be posthumously promoted to Vice Admiral for his heroic actions. By 10:15 a.m., just 15 minutes after the attack began, the convoy has ceased to exist as an organized force. 7 transports are sinking or sunk, their oil and debris spreading across miles of ocean. Of the 8 destroyers, 4 are destroyed or fatally damaged. The surviving destroyers, Shikanami, Yukazi, Uranami, and Asagumo, circle desperately through the wreckage, pulling survivors from the water. But there are too many men in the water and too few ships to rescue them. The second wave of Allied aircraft arrives at approximately 200 p.m., finding a scene of devastation. Burning ships, oil slicks, and debris cover square miles of ocean. Their remaining Japanese destroyers, still picking up survivors, are forced to abandon their rescue efforts and defend themselves. The transport Wawamaru, somehow still afloat despite earlier damage, is finished off by additional skip bombing attacks. The destroyer Asashio, already sunk with Captain Sarto aboard, becomes a war grave as oil continues to bubble up from her wreckage. As darkness falls on March 3rd, the full scale of the disaster becomes apparent. Of 6,900 troops embarked at Rabaul, fewer than 200 will reach Leh. The destroyers that survived working through the night rescue approximately 2,700 men who will be returned to Rabaul, but nearly 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors are dead, killed in action, or drowned in the Bismarck Sea. The carefully assembled reinforcement for New Guinea's defense has been annihilated in a single day's action. The aftermath of the battle is as controversial as it is decisive. On March 4th, American PT boats and aircraft patrol the battle area, attacking anything that floats. The stated justification is preventing Japanese troops from reaching shore and reinforcing Leh, but many Allied aircrew are sickened by what they see as the unnecessary killing of helpless survivors. This moral complexity, the transformation of warfare from a contest between combatants to the wholesale destruction of human beings, will haunt many participants for the rest of their lives. For the Japanese Navy, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea represents a fundamental shift in the nature of naval warfare. Admiral Matt Ugaki, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet, writes in his diary, "We've lost the ability to move freely within range of enemy land-based aircraft. The convoy system, which has been the basis of our logistics since the beginning of the war, is no longer viable. Never again will the Japanese attempt to reinforce their garrisons with large convoys in daylight. From no one, only submarines and fast destroyers operating under cover of darkness thereat runs will be used to supply isolated garrisons. The tactical success of skip bombing revolutionizes Allied shipping operations throughout the Pacific. General Kenny's innovation, born of desperation and necessity, proves that properly equipped and trained land-based aircraft can control sea lanes as effectively as any naval force. Within months, skip bombing techniques are being employed from the Solomons to the Philippines, making Japanese shipping movements increasingly hazardous and ultimately unsustainable. For Major Papi, the architect of the B-25 gunship modifications, the battle is both a professional triumph and a personal vindication. His family remains imprisoned in the Philippines, and every Japanese ship sunk brings their liberation closer. He continues to innovate, developing new weapons and tactics that will make Allied aircraft even more deadly. North American Aviation, manufacturer of the B-25, begins incorporating guns modifications directly into production aircraft, creating purpose-built gunships that will terrorize Japanese shipping for the remainder of the war. The strategic implications of the Bismarck Sea disaster ripple throughout the Japanese command structure. On March 25, 1943, Imperial General Headquarters issues a new directive prioritizing the defense of New Guinea over operations in the Solomon Islands. But without the ability to reinforce and supply their positions by sea, this directive is essentially meaningless. The Japanese garrisons at Les Salamaua and other positions along the New Guinea coast are now effectively isolated, left to fight and die where they stand. Lieutenant General Adachi, who survived the sinking of the Tokitsukas, reaches Leh with fewer than 2,200 troops, less than 20% of the force that departed rebel. His 18th Army, already under strength and poorly supplied, must now face growing Allied forces without hope of significant reinforcement. In his first report to Rabaul, Adachi states simply, "The situation is beyond recovery by normal means." His pessimistic assessment proves accurate. Within 6 months, Leh falls to Allied forces advancing by land and air. The individual stories of survival from the battle are both remarkable and tragic. Captain Tamichihara of the destroyer Amatsukaze, which was not part of the convoy, later interviews survivors and records their experiences. One soldier from the 51st Division describes spending 3 days clinging to wreckage before washing ashore on a Japanese-held island. Of the 12 men who started on the same piece of debris, only 3 survived, the others taken by sharks, exhaustion, or despair. Such accounts become common as survivors trickle in over the following weeks. Rear Admiral Kimura, wounded but alive, faces no official censure for the convoy's destruction. The Japanese High Command recognizes that he faced an impossible situation, but he never commands another convoy operation. The psychological impact of watching his entire force destroyed in minutes by a new form of attack. He could neither anticipate nor counterbreak something in this veteran officer. He spends the remainder of the war in administrative positions, haunted by the memories of the Bismarck Sea. The American pilots who participated in the battle become instant legends in the Southwest Pacific Theater. Major Ed Lana is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership of the skip bombing attack. But in private conversations, many express ambivalence about their victory. Lieutenant Charles Howe writes to his wife, "We destroyed them completely. It was necessary. I know, but I can't forget the sight of all those men in the water. This isn't the kind of war I thought I'd be fighting." General MacArthur, ever the showman, issues a triumphant communique claiming the destruction of 22 ships and 15,000 Japanese troops. These figures are wild exaggerations. Actual Japanese losses are 8 transports, 4 destroyers, and approximately 3,000 men. But the propaganda value is immense. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea is portrayed as revenge for Pearl Harbor, proof that American innovation and courage can overcome Japanese military might. The reality, as always in war, is more complex. For the Australians who participated in the battle, particularly the Beaufighter crews of No. 30 Squadron, the victory validates their contribution to the Pacific War. Often overshadowed by their American allies, the RAF's crucial role in suppressing Japanese anti-aircraft defenses makes the skip bombing attacks possible. Squadron leader Claude Ridley receives the Distinguished Flying Cross, but like his American counterparts, he is troubled by the one-sided nature of the battle. It wasn't a fight, he later says. It was an execution. The Japanese Army's response to the disaster is to blame the Navy for inadequate protection, rekindling the bitter inter-service rivalry that hampers Japanese military effectiveness throughout the war. Army commanders argue that the Navy should have provided aircraft carriers for cover, ignoring the fact that Japan's carrier forces are already stretched to breaking point. The Navy counters that the Army's insistence on daylight convoy operations in the face of overwhelming Allied air superiority amounts to criminal negligence. This mutual recrimination prevents any serious effort to develop counter-tactics to skip bombing. In the broader context of the Pacific War, the battle off the Bismarck Sea marks a turning point as significant as Midway or Guadalcanal. It demonstrates conclusively that air power properly employed can control sea lines of communication as effectively as any fleet. For island nations like Japan and Britain dependent on seaborne trade and supply, this revolution in warfare has profound implications. The age of the battleship is ending. The age of the aircraft has truly begun. The technical lessons learned from the battle drive rapid innovation on both sides. The Allies refine their skip bombing techniques, developing new bomb sites and training procedures that increase accuracy even further. They also begin experimenting with rockets and larger bombs, seeking to destroy even the most heavily armored warships. The Japanese, belatedly recognizing the threat, attempt to develop counters, barrage balloons, smokescreens, specialized anti-aircraft ammunition designed to engage low-flying aircraft. But these measures are too little too late. Perhaps the most poignant aftermath of the battle involves the families of the dead. In Japan, where official casualty reports are heavily censored, many families wait months or even years to learn the fate of their loved ones. Mrs. Yamada, whose husband was aboard the transport Teomaru, receives only a brief notice that he died gloriously for the Emperor in the South Seas. She never learns the details of his death, the terror of the skip bombing attack, the horror of the sinking ship, the desperate struggle in oil-covered waters. Such ignorance is perhaps merciful for the Allied code rears who provided the intelligence that made the victory possible. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea is proof of their value. The ability to read Japanese naval codes gives the Allies an insurmountable advantage, allowing them to concentrate their forces at exactly the right time and place. But this success carries its own danger. If the Japanese realize their codes are compromised, they will change them. Blinding. Allied intelligence. Extreme care is taken to make the battle appear to be the result of lucky reconnaissance, rather than code-reading. The propaganda war following the battle is almost as intense as the physical combat. Tokyo Radio claims that the convoy successfully delivered its troops to Leh with minimal losses. That American claims of victory are laughable. But the Japanese soldiers at Leh know better. They see the pitiful remnants of what was supposed to be their relief force, understand that they're now truly on their own. Morale, already low from months of jungle warfare and inadequate supplies, plummets further. In Washington and Canberra, the victory is seized upon as evidence that the tide has turned in the Pacific. Political leaders who have been skeptical of MacArthur's ambitious plans for advancing through New Guinea now become believers. Resources that might have gone to other theaters are redirected to the Southwest Pacific. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea in effect validates MacArthur's strategy and ensures that the drive through New Guinea and the Philippines will receive the support it needs. The environmental impact of the battle, though little considered at the time, is significant. Thousands of tons of oil from the sunken ships spread across the Bismarck Sea, fouling beaches and reefs for hundreds of miles. The wrecks themselves, laden with ammunition and supplies, become underwater tombs and environmental hazards that persist to this day. Modern surveys of the battle area reveal ships sitting upright on the bottom, their holds still full of trucks, ammunition, and the remains of those who went down with them. For military historians, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea becomes a classic case study in the evolution of warfare. It demonstrates the importance of innovation, the value of intelligence, and the decisive impact of air power when properly employed. War colleges around the world analyze the battle, drawing lessons about the vulnerability of surface ships to air attack, the importance of air superiority, and the need for joint operations between air and naval forces. The personal courage displayed by individuals on both sides deserves recognition. Japanese destroyer captains who placed their ships between the transports and attackers knowing they were likely to die. Allied pilots who flew into walls of anti-aircraft fire at point-blank range. Sailors on both sides who risked their lives pulling survivors from oil-covered, shark-infested waters. War brings out the worst in humanity, but also sometimes the best. As the war progresses, the veterans of the Bismarck Sea battle find themselves scattered across the Pacific. Some participate in the island-hopping campaign through the Solomon Islands and the Philippines. Others are transferred to training commands, passing on the hard-learned lessons of skip bombing to generations of pilots. A few, burned out by the intensity of combat, are sent home, carrying physical and psychological scars that will never fully heal. General Kenny goes on to greater fame, eventually commanding all Allied air forces in the Pacific. But he always considers the Bismarck Sea his greatest victory, the battle that proved air power could be decisive in maritime warfare. In his memoirs written years after the war, he reflects, "We changed the nature of war that day. Ships could no longer operate within range of land-based aircraft unless they controlled the air above them. It was a lesson written in blood, but one that needed to be learned. For Japan, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea is a disaster from which they never fully recover. The loss of an entire division's worth of troops and equipment, combined with the psychological impact of the defeat, marks the beginning of the end for Japanese positions in New Guinea. Within a year, most of their garrisons are either destroyed or isolated, left to starve in the jungle as the war passes them by. The dream of a greater East Asiaco-prosperity sphere dies in the oil-slicked waters of the Bismarck Sea. The technological revolution initiated by skip bombing continues long after the war. Modern anti-8-ship missiles essentially follow the same principle: high speed, low-altitude approach to avoid detection and defensive systems. The B-25s of 1943 with their improvised gunship, modifications and skip bombing techniques are the direct ancestors of today's maritime strike aircraft. The lesson that innovation and adaptation can overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges remains as relevant today as it was in the desperate days of 1943. In the end, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea is remembered differently by different people. For the Allies, it is a triumph of innovation and courage, proof that they could defeat Japan's best forces. For the Japanese, it is a tragedy that exemplifies the impossible situation they faced, outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy whose technological and industrial superiority grew stronger with each passing day. For the families of the dead on both sides, it is simply a date when their world changed forever, when fathers, husbands, and sons disappeared into the vastness of the Pacific. Today, the Bismarck Sea is peaceful, its waters pied by fishing boats and the occasional research vessel documenting the wrecks below. But for those who know the history, who understand what happened here on March 3, 1943, these waters tell a different story. They speak of innovation born of desperation, of courage in the face of certain death, of the terrible arithmetic of war, where success is measured in ships sunk and lives lost. They remind us that behind every military innovation, every tactical triumph, there is a human cost that can never be fully calculated or repaid. The battle's legacy extends beyond military history into the realm of ethics and international law. The attacking of survivors in the water, even if militarily justifiable, raise uncomfortable questions about the conduct of war. Where is the line between military necessity and humanity? Can actions be both tactically correct and morally wrong? These questions, first raised in the aftermath of the Bismarck Sea, continue to challenge military leaders and ethicists today. For the survivors, the battle never really ends. Decades after the war, elderly Japanese veterans still wake with nightmares of skip bombing B-25s coming in at wave-top height. American pilots still see the faces of Japanese sailors in the water, wondering if they should have done something different. Australian bowfighter crews still hear the sound of their cannons tearing through thin steel and human flesh. These psychological wounds, invisible but real, are perhaps the battle's most enduring legacy. The strategic impact of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea reverberates through the remainder of the Pacific War. Japanese inability to reinforce their garrisons means that Allied forces can advance more rapidly than anticipated, leaping from island to island, bypassing strong points that would have required bloody frontal assaults. Lives are saved, Allied lives, because of the success at Bismarck Sea. But this calculus of war, trading Japanese lives for Allied ones, is its own form of moral burden. In military meetings around the world, The Battle of the Bismarck Sea is studied as a perfect example of what modern theorists call effects-based operations, achieving strategic goals through precise application of force rather than overwhelming mass. The battle demonstrates that with proper intelligence, innovative tactics, and coordinated execution, a smaller force can defeat a larger one. It's a lesson that resonates in an age of precision weapons and limited military budgets. The environmental legacy of the battle continues to unfold. The wrecks are slowly deteriorating, releasing oil and other pollutants into the marine ecosystem. Unexploded ordnance poses risks to fishermen and divers. Efforts to properly document and preserve these sites as war graves face challenges, from illegal salvage operations seeking valuable metals. The battle, in a sense, continues to claim victims long after the last veteran has passed away. Cultural memory of the battle varies significantly between nations. In Australia, it's celebrated as a moment when the RAF proved itself equal to any air force in the world. In the United States, it's often overshadowed by larger battles like Midway or the Philippine Sea. In Japan, it's largely forgotten, one disaster among many and aware that ended in atomic fire. These different narratives reflect broader differences in how nations remember and interpret their military histories. The role of intelligence in the victory cannot be overstated. The ultra-coderiers who decrypted Japanese messages, the coast watchers who reported ship movements, their reconnaissance pilots who found the convoy, all played crucial roles. The battle demonstrates that in modern warfare, information is as important as firepower. Knowing where the enemy is, where they're going, and what they intend to do provides an advantage that no amount of courage or skill can overcome. The human dimension of the battle extends beyond the combatants to include the native peoples of New Guinea and nearby islands. For them, the battle brought both opportunity and tragedy. Opportunity in the form of salvage from wrecked ships and aircraft, tragedy in the disruption of their traditional fishing grounds, and the introduction of modern warfare's devastation to their homeland. Their stories, largely unrecorded, are part of the battle's broader legacy. As we reflect on the Battle of the Bismarck Sea from the perspective of 8 decades, what lessons emerge? Perhaps the most important is that innovation in warfare, while necessary for victory, always comes at a human cost. The skip bombing technique that proved so effective was essentially a method for killing more efficiently. The modified B-25s that swept through the Japanese convoy were instruments of destruction, no matter how much we admire the ingenuity of their creation. Yet we must also acknowledge the context in which these innovations occurred. The Allied forces were fighting against an aggressive totalitarian regime that had launched unprovoked war across the Pacific. The Japanese soldiers being transported to New Guinea were not innocents. They were instruments of conquest and oppression. The moral clarity of the Second World War, often absent in later conflicts, provides some justification for the terrible efficiency of the Bismarck Sea victory. The battle also demonstrates the importance of adaptation in warfare. Both sides entered the Pacific War with preconceived notions about how naval warfare would be conducted. Battleship fleets engaging in climactic gun duels with aircraft playing a supporting role. The reality proved very different. Those who adapted quickly, like Kenny and his innovative airmen, succeeded. Those who clung to outdated doctrine, like the Japanese convoy commanders who believed their destroyers could protect them from air attack, paid a terrible price. Looking forward, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea offers warnings for contemporary military planners. It shows how quickly technological advantage can shift, how innovations can render entire military strategies obsolete almost overnight. In an age of cyber warfare, drones and artificial intelligence, the lesson of Bismarck Sea, that innovation and adaptation are essential for military success, remains profoundly relevant. The personal stories from the battle remind us that war is ultimately about human beings, not statistics or strategic objectives. Each of the 3,000 Japanese who died in the Bismarck Sea had a family, hopes, dreams. Each Allied airman who flew into anti-aircraft fire had people waiting for them to come home. These individual tragedies, multiplied millions of times across the Pacific War, constitute the true cost of conflict. As the last veterans of the battle pass away, taking with them their first-hand memories, we're left with historical records, photographs, and interpretations. The danger is that the Battle of the Bismarck Sea becomes just another historical event stripped of its human dimension, reduced to arrows on maps and statistics in textbooks. We must resist this tendency, remembering that history is made by, individuals making choices under extreme pressure, often with incomplete information and conflicting moral imperatives. The battle's influence on post-war military development was substantial. The success of skip bombing led directly to increased investment in maritime strike aircraft and anti-H ship weapons. The vulnerability of surface ships to attack drove development of better anti-aircraft systems, radar, and eventually surface-to-air missiles. The arms race between offensive air power and defensive naval systems initiated at Bismarck Sea continues to this day. For the nations involved, the battle became part of their military traditions and institutional memories. The United States Air Force cites Bismarck Sea as validation of independent air operations. The Royal Australian Air Force sees it as proof of their effectiveness in joint operations. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force studies it as a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of naval force without air superiority. These different interpretations shape how modern militaries prepare for future conflicts. The ethical questions raised by the battle continue to resonate. The killing of survivors in the water, even if militarily justified to prevent them from reinforcing enemy positions, challenges our notions of honorable warfare. The deliberate targeting of transport ships packed with soldiers blurs the line between combatants and non-combatants. These moral ambiguities, first confronted in the aftermath of Bismarck Sea, remain relevant as military technology becomes ever more lethal and discriminating. In the broader narrative of the Pacific War, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea presents a crucial turning point. It marked the moment when Allied forces definitively seized the initiative in the Southwest Pacific. When Japanese expansion was not just halted but reversed, the psychological impact demonstrating that Japanese forces could be not just defeated, but annihilated boosted Allied morale while devastating Japanese confidence. After Bismarck Sea, the question was not whether Japan would lose the war, but how long and at what cost. The battle also exemplifies the importance of joint operations in modern warfare. The success at Bismarck Sea required coordination between American and Australian forces, between air and naval units, between intelligence gatherers and operational commanders. This integration, difficult to achieve in practice, proved devastatingly effective when properly executed. Modern military doctrine's emphasis on joint operations can trace its roots partly to successes like Bismarck Sea. For students of military history, the battle offers numerous lessons. The importance of intelligence, knowing enemy intentions and movements, cannot be overstated. The value of innovation and willingness to try new tactics, even if they seem unorthodox or dangerous. The critical nature of air superiority in modern warfare. The vulnerability of surface ships to air attack without adequate defensive measures. These lessons learned at terrible cost in 1943 remain relevant for military planners today. The human capacity for both destruction and survival displayed at Bismarck Sea is remarkable. The ingenuity that created skip bombing and gunship B-25s shows human creativity directed toward warfare. The courage of pilots flying into anti-aircraft fire and sailors rescuing survivors from burning waters demonstrates human bravery under extreme conditions. The suffering of those who died in burning ships or oil-covered waters reminds us of war's terrible cost. As we conclude this examination of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, we must acknowledge its complexity. It was simultaneously a tactical triumph and a human tragedy, a display of innovation and an example of destruction, a necessary military action and a moral challenge. These contradictions are not unique to Bismarck Sea. They characterize all warfare, but they are particularly stark in this battle where success was so complete and the human cost so visible. The legacy of those brief moments, these seconds Japanese captains had to react to the skip bombing attack with its 5-second delay fuses, extends far beyond the immediate tactical situation. In those brief moments, the nature of naval warfare changed forever. The age when surface ships could operate with relative impunity ended. The dominance of air power over sea power was definitively established. The importance of innovation and adaptation in warfare was dramatically demonstrated. Today, as tensions rise in the same Pacific waters where the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was fought, the lessons of 1943 remain relevant. The importance of air superiority, the vulnerability of naval forces to precision weapons, the critical role of intelligence and surveillance, all demonstrated at Bismarck Sea, continue to shape military planning and operations. The ghosts of the Bismarck Sea have lessons for us still if we're willing to learn them. In remembering the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, we honor not just the victors but all who participated, recognizing their courage, mourning their losses, and learning from their experiences. The battle stands as a reminder that war, however necessary it may sometimes be, is always a tragedy. The innovation and courage displayed at Bismarck Sea deserve our admiration, but the death and destruction should strengthen our resolve to find better ways to resolve conflicts. The story of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, from Rear Admiral Kimura's desperate convoy to General Kenny's innovative tactics, from the courage of individual pilots and sailors to the tragedy of thousands of deaths, is ultimately a human story. It reminds us that behind every military innovation, every tactical victory, every strategic decision, there are human beings whose lives are forever changed. In those seconds that Japanese captains had to act, in those 15 minutes that destroyed a convoy, entire worlds ended and history pivoted. This is the true legacy of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Not just the tactical lessons or strategic implications, but the reminder that war is the most serious of human endeavors, demanding our best qualities while revealing our capacity for destruction. As we face an uncertain future, the battle's lessons about innovation, adaptation, and the human cost of conflict remain as relevant today as they were on that clear morning in March 1943, when skip-bombing B-25s came in at wave-top height and changed the nature of warfare forever. The men who fought and died in the Bismarck Sea, Japanese and Allied, soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines, deserve to be remembered not as statistics, but as individuals who found themselves at a crucial moment in history. Their sacrifice, whether voluntary or forced, whether in victory or defeat, contributed to the shaping of our modern world. We owe them not just remembrance but understanding, not just honor, but learning from their experiences to build a better, more peaceful future. As Thiessen sets over the Bismarck Sea today, its waters calm and peaceful, it's hard to imagine the violence and terror of March 3, 1943. But beneath those peaceful waters lie the remains of ships and men, silent testimony to one of the Pacific War's most decisive battles. Their presence reminds us that the freedom and prosperity we enjoy today was purchased at terrible cost, and that we have an obligation to those who paid that price to use our freedom wisely and work toward a world where such sacrifices are no longer necessary. This is the story of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, a story of innovation and destruction, courage and terror, victory and tragedy. It's a story that deserves to be told, not because war is glorious, but because understanding our past in all its complexity and contradiction is essential to navigating our future. The mere seconds that Japanese captains had to react to skip-bombing B-25s may seem like a small detail in the vast narrative of World War II, but in those seconds, the future of the Pacific War was determined, and thousands of lives were sealed to their fate.